Hello and welcome back to Yes and by Marin YouTube, posting videos every Tuesday to discuss authentic alignment. This week, a discussion on self-compassion. By the end of this video, you will have at least one practice to implement into your week right away. Before I get into it, why are we talking about self-compassion? There are 3 reasons I'm going to quickly address. One is all the researched benefits associated with the practice of self-compassion. The second is a month after our New Year's resolutions, we may be in dire need of self-compassion. And the third is that it isn't our natural tendency. So these great benefits of self-compassion, when I was in my PhD program for positive developmental psychology, I studied self-compassion a lot. I'm not even going to pretend to know all the benefits because there are so many, so I'm just going to read off the screen. I dug back into my research from grad school and I picked out some of the things that I think are important for this conversation. So, benefits. Benefits of self-compassion. Greater levels of happiness, optimism, life satisfaction, body appreciation, perceived confidence, and motivation. Less anxiety, depression, stress, rumination, body shame, or fear of failure. It deactivates the psychobiological threat system, such as insecure attachment, defensiveness, automatic arousal. It activates the self-soothing system, so safety, oxytocin. It generates positive emotions by embracing negative emotions or negative events. Because of this, there's better coping. You can look at difficult events with more ease, embrace emotions with more ease and utility. It is linked to autonomy, competence, relatedness, and self-determination. Those who are self-compassionate take more accountability for their actions. They have greater goal attainment. Their meaning of life is enhanced. Emotional intelligence, wisdom, personal initiative, curiosity, intellectual flexibility, life satisfaction, and feelings of social connectedness. This list is just a brief list of all the things that self-compassion is related to. Okay, so the second point, it is now February. Welcome to the new month, and that means that it is a month since many of us have set New Year's resolutions. You can check out my video on helpful tips on how to keep a New Year's resolution or any change in habit. So why is self-compassion really beneficial to talk about now? Because, as I just discussed with all those benefits, some of the relationships between self-compassion and some of these craved, desired outcomes is goal attainment, motivation, and responsibility. So all of these things that have to be in place in order for us to achieve our New Year's resolutions, in order for us to progress toward what we longed for, what we set our intention for at the beginning of January. And then also, in times of hardship, when we have to cope with what is in front of us, the reality, maybe disappointment or anger or frustration, if we are self-compassionate, we're better able to interact with those emotions. And that last piece, that it is not the status quo. So at least in my experience, self-compassion has been something that I have had to be intentional about and practice every single day. And unfortunately, I don't think this information, these practices, these tools are readily available in our society, especially if we're looking at magazine covers or movies or media of any sort. The conversation I've found tends to center around lack or self-criticism or this feeling that we are not enough, and coming from that point to get better or to become enough somehow, rather than starting with this mindset of self-compassion, of abundance, and then moving forward. Before I talk about the practice that I have adopted and I want to provide for you today as an option for how you can start to cultivate self-compassion with yourself, I just want to give credit where credit is due. So like I said, when I was in grad school, I studied a lot of Kristen Neff's work. She defines it using 3 categories. The first is self-kindness versus self-judgment. The second is common humanity versus isolation, so an idea of togetherness and connectedness rather than believing that we are the only ones. And the third is mindfulness versus over-identification. So this is the component of self-compassion that allows you to distance yourself a little bit from what's happening. There are many practices you can take with these components in mind. You can meditate, you can do journal entries, you can work with a coach, you can work with a therapist, you can simply observe when you're having a self-critical thought as opposed to a self-compassionate thought. And so in a moment, I will offer you the practice that I have adopted and I have really enjoyed, but know that this is not the only option, and that self-compassion, as I've already talked about, is so important. And if this doesn't resonate with you, then there are so many other options and so many other definitions and perspectives on this skill that you can look into for yourself. So I'm sure I am not the only person who has adopted this practice, but I haven't found it anywhere else. So I'm just going to name this practice myself, object compassion. And I was telling my boyfriend about this, and I was like, is this not normal? And he reassured me that I'm okay. So hopefully you think I'm okay as well. And to be honest, why I even asked the question in the first place is because it sounds a little bizarre. And when I'm doing it, I even feel a little bizarre. And it has benefited me so greatly. It has allowed me to practice compassion where compassion feels easier, which is when it is with something or someone else. And then once I strengthen that skill of object compassion, then I can start to practice it more easily with myself. So let me give you a few examples just to give you an idea of what this looks like, at least in my life, naturally in story form. So the other day I was going through the Culver's drive-thru, of course, and it was very, very cold outside, which makes a lot of sense that I would want ice cream when it's really, really cold outside. And I got to the drive-thru speaker and wanted to roll down my window, and the window was stuck. Emotion built in me right away. And then I pulled through the drive-thru and I parked and I worked on getting this window down, and I started to practice this idea of object compassion. So I talked to the window, not aloud, but in my head, but I was thinking, I know it's really cold. Like, I know it doesn't really make sense that I'm getting ice cream right now, and you probably just want to stay warm exactly where you are and not move. Like, that's how I feel too when I'm in my bed and I have my heated blanket on and I don't want to move either. I get it. I get that you feel stuck, and like, this is going to be really great. I promise, like, this will make me a better, which will make me treat you better, and this is going to be great. So it was this whole dialogue, talking to a window, encouraging it to lower so that I could get my concrete mixer. And notice, even in that dialogue, the idea of common humanity versus isolation. So to the window, I was saying, I know, me too. I sometimes want to curl up into a heated blanket and stay there forever and not move. Mindfulness. So I wasn't looking at the window and saying, oh my God, you're such a sucky car, you're so old, and started like making the car a bad car. I just was mindful that the window isn't going down because it's really cold outside. So I stepped back and then I was like, okay, what would cause a window to stay up? And then it allowed me to start problem solving and self-kindness over self-judgment. So I didn't judge this window for staying up. I was not like, you are such a horrible window. You're a window. You're supposed to be able to go down. Why aren't you going down? That's judgment. Instead, I was like, I get it. I get it. And being kind to the window. And this all, even as I say it right now, and you can tell because I'm laughing, it's kind of silly. It's really silly, honestly. And it has so benefited me and my ability to be self-compassionate, because when I have dialogues like this in my everyday life, it allows me to practice what is a little more difficult, which is self-compassion. It allows me to then utilize the skills, recognize when I'm about to be self-critical or come from a place of lack, and instead choose to do what I've been practicing with objects. And I get to experience, when it's a little easier and comes a little more naturally with this object compassion, the benefits of self-compassion. So when I treated my window nicely, it allowed my emotions to stay calm. I didn't go into like a panic, super high emotive state. I stayed calm, I problem solved. I eventually got the windows down and got my concrete mixer. The window was happy, I was happy, my car wasn't broken. I stayed, it all worked out. As opposed to if I were to have gotten super hasteful or like slammed the window or broken it or like scurried into the Culver's on the inside because I couldn't go through the drive-thru and ordered something that was mean to someone else. Like, that could have been a different outcome. Those are extremes, but you know what I'm saying. There's benefits that come with the compassion. A few more examples just to give you like the breadth of what's possible here. From that point forward, whenever my window goes down, because it's still very, very cold in Minnesota, whenever my window goes down, I talk to it in a nice, compassionate way. I'm like, awesome job. I know it's cold. Thank you so much for going down. Or another example, this morning I was frying eggs and I need a new pan. It is not nonstick anymore. But today, for some reason, it didn't stick. It was super easy to clean afterwards, and I was just like, oh my gosh, you're so great. I'm so grateful that you didn't stick today. Like, I know you tend to want to hold on to the eggs for as long as possible. I appreciate you allowing yourself to let it go, because that wasn't needed today. Thank you. Sometimes my apartment door has a hard time locking. When it's having trouble locking, like, I know sometimes it's scary to feel like you could potentially be stuck like this forever, or like, what if you're locking out possibilities and closing the door to something that could be? I know that's scary, and right now this is what's best, because we don't want something to enter this space right now because everyone is gone from the home. Last week when it was the polar vortex, I also practiced self-compassion with the wind. So it was very windy, and sometimes I would get frustrated and I would be cold in my bones. And sometimes I allowed myself to be like, wind, I hear you. Whoa, like you must have something going on, or like that trip from the North Pole literally must have been quite a ride, because this is more intense than I have ever experienced you before. To just have more of a conversation of like, you must be going through something, or like, I see you, I'm kind to you, I'm not judging you, I'm not isolating myself or thinking that I'm better than you, or that there's something vastly different between us. It's this whole practice of these points of self-compassion. And then, as I keep saying, eventually I'm able, with more ease, to turn it on myself. So to start talking to myself as I slide down my hill on the ice and catch myself on the car, rather than think, Marin, you're an idiot for not salting the road before you came out here, I thought, wow, Marin, that was amazing. You kept your coffee, you didn't even fall, you caught yourself, that was so great. Or if I am feeling stressed, to say, I know a lot of people feel really stressed. It's really natural for you to feel stressed in this environment. That's okay. How can we work through this? Over time, it has become more and more natural and has benefited me so greatly. Again, starting with something that feels easier by talking to objects in this manner, and then being able to talk to myself. In both circumstances, I experience benefits, I experience more abundance, I experience more ease with life, and ultimately just more flourishing. And so, if you would like, I would be so interested to hear how your practice of object compassion goes for this week. I invite you to write down the components of self-compassion as defined by Kristen Neff, or seek your own version of self-compassion, just something that allows you to focus in on what exactly you're practicing, and then start by practicing it with objects so that eventually you can practice it with yourself. Let me know if you have any further questions in the comments below, or contact me on any of my platforms. My website is the best place to start, otherwise Facebook or Instagram, email as well, all of it linked below. And please let me know how this practice goes, if you enjoyed it, and if you find the same benefits that I have discussed today. Have a great rest of your week, and I will see you again next Tuesday.